This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, the toughest Italian wine program. 1,000 candidates have produced 262 Italian wine ambassadors to date. Next courses in Hong Kong, Russia, New York, and Verona. Think you make the cut? Apply now at vinitalyinternational.com. Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Cynthia Chaplin, and this is Voices. Every Wednesday, I will be sharing conversations with international wine industry professionals, discussing issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion through their personal experiences working in the field of wine. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your pods. Welcome to Voices. This is Cynthia Chaplin, and today I have the great pleasure of welcoming MJ Towler. He's also known as the Black Wine Guy. MJ's based on the Jersey Shore, and he has gone from being a self-described, totally obsessed wine newbie to the world's first ever African-American fine and rare wine auctioneer in less than 3 years. So he's now hosting a successful and inspiring podcast that makes me very jealous called The Black Wine Guy Experience. So thanks for coming on today, MJ. Nice to hear you.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. What an honor to be on the Italian Wine Podcast.
Oh, great. I'm glad you look at it that way. I look at it as an honor being on it myself, frankly. I want to talk to you about how you got into the wine world, because it definitely was not through any kind of a traditional path. In fact, you've got a law degree from Rutgers, and you were a lifestyle and fitness coach for 15 years. So fill me in. How on earth did you get into wine? Like where, when? What made the light bulb come on with that?
Well, actually, I think I got in the way most people do. You kind of fall into it, to be honest with you. So I did graduate from law school. And when I was in law school, I had a friend from undergraduate who lived in New York City. And so I would go hang out in New York City a lot on the weekends. And he introduced me to a man named John Capon. And John Capon is the chairman of Acker Wines. His family owned, at the time it was called Acker, Merrill and Condon. And me and John just kind of hit it off, and we used to hang out all the time. John at that time was a hip hop producer. He wasn't even into wine himself. So we would just hang out, listen to music, drink, do what young men did in the 90s in New York City.
Young women were doing that too, believe me.
I know, which was getting high and drinking, right? Like, and now it's legal here in the States, but like we were hanging out, we were partying, we were having a great time, and he was a really cool guy. I got along with him. So, I graduated law school, and it's one of those things where when I went to law school, I knew I might not be a lawyer. However, I graduated from college in 1992 after being on a 6-year program, and everybody I knew was like going to graduate school. And so law school is kind of like what you do when you don't know what you want to do, because it's only 3 years, and law touches everything in this world at some point in some way. As we saw, like the wine tariffs in the States, like law touches everything. So I figured it'd be a pretty flexible graduate degree. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so that's how I ended up in law school. But connected with John, and then I got out, and I was like, once I was in there, I was like, oh, I don't want to be a lawyer. There's no way I can't do this for like any amount of time in my life. And so I had graduated, actually went to work as a field marketing rep for Reebok after I got out of law school, because a passion of mine back then, I'd run track in high school and for college for a few years, and I love sneakers. So I think my issue is like I go on tangents with things. Like I used to have like I used to collect sneakers. I don't even know if I collect them. I used to get them for free, but yeah, I used to have a ton of sneakers.
Oh, even better, getting them for free. That helps the collection.
Wearing a different pair every day. But there was a point where even that, I was living in Philadelphia, and I really wanted to be just in New York City. And so John said, hey, I'm starting to take a bigger role at the shop, and why don't you come work with me, and you'll drink the finest wines in the world on a nightly basis.
An offer that you couldn't refuse, definitely.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything about wine, but I knew it was New York. I had an idea that if I was drinking the best wines in the world on a nightly basis in New York City, that was going to be pretty fun. Like, that was going to be pretty outrageous. I was like, this isn't going to suck. And so, I went to work there, and it was baptism by fire. I had worked retail before for years, and specialty retail. It had been running shoes, but there's something about when you work in specialty retail, not big box, where you have to have a certain level of knowledge and people see you as their consultant.
That's a really interesting take on retail. I haven't looked at it that way, but you're so right. Especially, a specialty product really does need all of that expertise.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of people. Thank you for saying it. I think a lot of people overlook that. I mean, I absolutely, I love retail just because you are dealing with the end consumer. You get so much insight about the psychology of the consumer, about buying preferences, trends. People when it was sneakers, it was like, what was the hottest sneaker? Everybody wanted it, and particularly running shoes. Everybody wanted the Nike Air Max, and Nike Air Max wasn't for everybody if you were going to run in it. It just you all have different needs, just like we all have a different palate. So if people would come and ask for something, and you want to gently guide them towards something that's more appropriate for their needs. So coming from that background, and then also coming out of law school, why I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. It's not like TV. It's not like LA law. I was like, hey, I'm a decent looking black guy. Blair Underwood, I could do that. I can go objection. You're overruled, all this stuff.
In a sharp suit. Awesome.
Yeah. Wear a sharp suit, exactly. Drive a nice car, have women falling all over me. Hey, okay, I'm in. And then there's like, nah, it's not like that, man.
Yeah, sitting around with boring tax books, no good.
Exactly. Which was one of my highest grades in law school. I have an interesting mind. Like, I enjoyed tax law.
So you're a nerd, basically.
No, I'm a geek. There we go.
Okay, we'll take that one.
Yeah, because I had to make a distinction because it was like wine geeks. Like a geek, you could be a geek and still be cool. A nerd, in my mind, Revenge of the Nerds. Nerds are nerds, and I love nerds. I have nerds for friends, but like, what can I geek out on, right? So when I got into wine, I started geeking out on wine. Like, you can geek out about comics, and people geek out about whatever. People geek out on watches. I mean, like, anything you collect, you're going to end up geeking out on. Because
that's true. That's a good point.
Right? Because you're so into it. You're looking for what's unique and what's off the beaten path. And then also there is a little bit of flexing in the geekness. And it's not. I came in the business in the late. So I got started at Acker in 97. Yeah, 97. So that was like full on height of, the Parker era and people bringing baller bottles and what score. And, there was all kinds of tasting groups. Like you had to bring like a Parker 96 or, a Parker 95 and up, and what I got out of that, because I didn't have a lot of money, was research, right? So I would show up at a tasting and, and bring a bottle of 1995 Bull Castell Shadow Enough to Pop Blanc, which got a 96 from Parker and you could get for $45. And everybody's bringing like their Harlan and their Screaming Eagles and their Cinquanons. And then you walk in with this white wine, like a fraction of the cost. And it ends up being like the wine of the night. Like that to me, that was the fun part of that, right? Like I out geeked those guys, right?
Those are the best moments.
Right. So it's like, it's finding that bottle that's off the radar that people aren't thinking about, right? Like, it's like, so I kind of got that in law school, because in law school you learn how you have to do what's called distinguished cases, and you had to do these things called shepherdized cases, and you actually had to look up in books back then too, these things. And so you learn how to make distinctions, which also is so important in wine, like the splitting of hairs of like, no, that's not licorice, that's actually anise. It's richer than licorice, it's anise. These tiny distinctions that we can do inside of our business when we're geeking out.
When they're in the deep dive mode with the rest of the geeks, exactly.
Calling out like verbena instead of just lemon oil, right? Like, it's stuff like that, right?
I need to come to your wine parties, definitely.
They're fun. A good time is had by all. So that was thrown into the fire, work on the floor of the store for 8 to 10 hours a day, and then go upstairs and pour for the wine tasting. See, this was so much in life is luck. I will tell people is luck. You kind of make your own luck, but there is luck involved, right? How I met John Capon was it shouldn't have happened to be honest with you. But things happened in my life and I ended up meeting him. And his family owns a store. And at the time, they still do, they had a separate component called the wine workshop. So above the store, they own the building, second floor at night, they would do these wine tastings. And they would have all kinds of wine tastings. They would have, tour of Italy, or they might have a vertical Tianello, or the Super Tuscans, or they might have California Colt Cabs, or they might have an evening of DRC, or, they might have Chateau Latour back to 1959, crazy stuff. Petrus back to like whatever, Taylor Flaggate back to 1928, like hardcore, serious tastings. And I got to pour for those tastings. And because I got to pour for those tastings, I got to taste those wines.
Yeah, you're right. This was definitely a baptism by fire in the best possible way.
And so, it was one of these things where that was 97. So, we were coming around. I only worked there for a year. It's a tough place to work. Family business are always tough to work at. Now it's become actually a real, they have a board of directors. But, when you work in a family business, it's fun. You're a referee sometimes for family stuff. But having worked there, people knew, like, people knew I knew about wine. If you worked there, you worked at Acker. Oh, this guy must know wine, and people would see me on the floor. And I was very quickly, at the end of 90 days, I remember Michael Capon, who was the president at the time, John's father, said, you know more about wine than 98% of the people in the world now,
You've got props in the industry when you get that from someone, who's so senior.
Yeah. And also, but he knew because when the Wine Spectator came out with its top wines of the millennium back in 99, I had like 7 or 8 out of 10 of the wines. It was ridiculous, and we're talking like, crazy stuff, all the 82s, all the 86s, DRC.
That's amazing. What a great experience. Like some incredible entry into the wine world. You didn't fall into it. You jumped in with both feet.
It was great. And I was like, oh my God. And then, I said, I kind of like everybody else, the law degree is whatever, but so many people that I meet in wine, particularly being here in the East Coast in New York, like people go to Columbia, people go to Ivy League schools and end up in wine. People go to like UVA and end up as a somm, because it is so intellectually stimulating.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I went to one of those schools and I definitely did not stay with what I was doing for my degree. So yeah, I absolutely get it. And it is endlessly fascinating. As you said, the deep dive stuff, the minutia does become really addictive. So having worked at somewhere like Acker, that really gives you, a great jumping off spot. So where did you go next? I mean, what could have been better than that? What came next after that?
I was probably feeling myself too much, so I bounced around from a few jobs, and then like some seasonal work. If someone needed help for the holiday season. But then I landed as an assistant wine director at a place called the Sparrow Wine Company over in Hoboken, which is on the other side of the Hudson. And again, so I had been in the business, so that was early 99. So I had been in the business less than 2 years, and I was assistant wine director. And at the time, they were opening their second location, which was a huge flagship store on the other side of town, if people know Hoboken, because it was really getting built up back then. It was still, when it hadn't become what it, Hoboken and Jersey City have become basically like Manhattan, extensions of Manhattan. And this was a huge store. I mean, it's like the size of like maybe like a Total Wine would be. Like it's like a big, but it was fine wines, right? It had that big box size. And so the owner was working on another project. He was also opening a restaurant, and so he was like, "This has been my vision for 5 years. I'm turning it over to you. You buy all the wine." So I bought all the wines for like this, like I don't know, maybe it was huge store. So I did that, and then I say he made the mistake of taking me out to California because I had a friend who I'd worked with in New York City, actually at Acker, and then he was a graduate of UCSB, and he decided to go back to Santa Barbara. I was doing like direct imports of stuff from Santa Barbara, like stuff that wasn't with a distributor. I would just have him send me like 2 or 3 cases of some stuff, and then I would sell it,
Oh my gosh.
bootleg-ish. Now to think about it. Well, I mean, we got a 3-tier system. I was like, I got this thing. It's not available on the East Coast. You got to pick up a few bottles, and so I was having fun doing that. And then that's when I really got to the realization that I would think with every wine region, there's so much good stuff that doesn't leave. There's either not enough of it, or a lot of times there's not enough of it, or just like, like you live in Italy now, right? Like, oh my God, that's how much wine is made in Italy
Oh, absolutely.
that doesn't reach the United States is ludicrous. So what I'm saying is we don't know as consumers and as consumers of this product. There's so much. So my buddy invited. He said, "You got to come to this wine festival." I went out to this wine festival with my boss, and he knew. He's like, "Oh man, please don't leave me. Please don't leave me." And so then, yeah, literally like 3 months later, I moved out to Santa Barbara, California. This was 1999. And what I find interesting is here in the States, like Santa Barbara is still kind of like a burgeoning wine region. When people are like, "Oh my God, wine's from Santa Barbara," I was like, man, I was there in '99, man, before it had all these AVAs, and people were making wines in these areas. But wine requires time in its evolution, not just in the bottle, just as an industry.
Absolutely, and also sort of in sort of people's consciousness.
Yeah, right. So I mean, back then it was all big Napa cabs, and you had your that was like the predominant thing in the market. People weren't really thinking about a lot of the Rhone stuff. And then, but so what was better is I ended up working as a som and wine store manager at a place called the Montecito Wine Bistro. And, that was back in 1999, 2000. There weren't a lot of master sommeliers in the world. Most of the sommeliers in New York at that time, before I left, were like old French dudes. Most people didn't have, these degrees we have now, WSET, et cetera, and so on. Like it wasn't, I wouldn't say it wasn't necessary. You just had to know wine and be good with people. And I still think that.
Yeah, it was much more a thing in Europe than it was in the States in those days.
Yeah. And I think even with that, I think it's more, I'm willing to be wrong, but I think it was more the British. Like in France, Soms weren't going to study, and they knew the wines of the regions, they knew the wine list, and they were personable.
Yeah, lucky them. They grew up in the grapevines.
Yeah, So, and that was, also just a wonderful experience. Now, I will say this is another thing too about luck and fortune. Also, I was dealing with more of a high-end clientele, where I was working on the Upper West Side of New York City, and then in Montecito, California, which is an unincorporated area of Santa Barbara County, which where like Oprah lives in Montecito. That's where her house is. So I just had the opportunity. And then when you're dealing with clients like that, once you serve them well, you're a hospitality professional, people love to share with you. So guests would bring in crazy bottles. People would show up on a Tuesday night and bring whatever, DRC, Super Tuscans, all kinds of California cult stuff. And it'd be like the most ridiculous wine dinner impromptu on a Tuesday night.
It sounds fantastic.
So it was the land of sunshine and just so nice and great wine.
So you took all this experience with all these amazing wines and you parlayed it into becoming the first African-American fine and rare wine auctioneer. How did that happen? Because that also sounds really incredible and like a very unique experience.
Well, that goes back to Acker. So John wanted to get into auctions in the late 90s. So I think Acker had like 1 or 2 auctions before John with his dad. And it was really tough. But John saw where the wine market was going. So while I was at Acker, before I left, I worked in the auction department for a few months, learning how to appraise wines, et cetera, and so on. And they actually sent me to auctioneer school, which there was a school actually called the Missouri Auction School.
I did not know there was a school for auctioneers. That is very cool.
In St. Joseph's, Missouri, which is the home of the Stetson Cowboy Hat Factory. And the Missouri Auction School is known as, wait for it, the Harvard of Auctioneering School.
Okay.
Now, what's so funny was everybody was local-ish, or they were from, and they were coming to learn how to auction off steers or how to do estate sales. And I was like, I was the guy from New York. I was thinking one of 2 black guys, older black gentleman who was there. I think he was going to have an estate sale business. He was somewhere like in that Missouri area. And they were like, what do you do? And I was like, I'm going to be a wine auctioneer. They're like, what? They auction wine? And then I was telling them like, oh my God, it's incredible. Like these wine auctions, they do millions of dollars like in a day. And they were blown away. But to graduate, I had to be an auctioneer. So I was like, how much we give for it? Give me five, give me five. I got 10, 10, 10 in the back, 20, 20, 20, 20. Like I do the fast auction thing because that was what we were doing there. And, whereas wine auctions are much more civilized. The lady in the back, paddle number to the lady in the back, to the gentleman over there, 5,000. Do I have 6,000 for this beautiful case of declassified Bordeaux,
Yeah, that sounds more familiar.
I went to auction school with Acker. They were having a big auction, and no, John just asked me to come back and auction off some lots. So that's how that happened. And so again, I tell people a lot with life. I mean, it's just what it is. It's who you know. Who are you meeting? So you should always be networking and putting your best foot forward and trying to bring value to people. So even after I had left, I was able to go back and get on that podium and become the first Black African American fine and rare wine auctioneer.
That is very cool. I love that story. I have two friends who are auctioneers, one in the States and one in England, and I think it's an interesting job. But also just hearing that story of learning to be an auctioneer where people were learning to auction cattle, that's fantastic. Well, I've heard of a lot of people refer to you as a music-loving wine influencer. In and amongst all of this, I mean, we are hitting the highlights here, like top end sneakers and fine wines and cattle auctions. But this music loving wine influencer thing, I really am interested in this. What does that term mean to you? Music loving wine influencer. Do you see yourself as an influencer? How do you combine the music love and the wine love, like your work every day?
So interesting enough, when I worked at Acker back in the day when I was a young, foolish man, I had picked up the habit of smoking cigarettes in law school because of stress. But I mean, people in this business smoke cigarettes. I don't anymore, but it's kind of funny, right?
When you're supposed to be able to taste and smell everything, I don't understand how they do it.
Why does everything have notes of tobacco? But we actually, we were on West 72nd Street. So, between Broadway and Columbus, this is in New York City. So right next door to us was like a jazz club. So sometimes I'd be out having a cigarette if I was working late at night and standing next to the door. And people were like, oh, you playing tonight? So people, for some reason, I don't know what my look or my vibe, people always thought I was a musician. But I just loved music because my father collected. My father was I would say he was an audiophile. Like he was into the equipment, right? Like he had all the high end equipment. He didn't have as much music as I have, but I came to appreciate, and he had a very eclectic. So, he would have country music like Charlie Pride and Willie Nelson. Then you'd have Billie Holiday and you have Frank Sinatra. You know what I mean? So and also
he would have been great friends with my dad. Same music.
And then being a child of growing up in the 70s in the car with AM radio, I know all that AM radio stuff, like the Carpenters and all that stuff that is now being sampled by hip hop. I grew up on that kind of music. I had a huge CD collection. So I'm a bit of an early adopter. So I got my first CD player like 85 or 86 before it was really big. And back in the day, there used to be this thing called the Columbia House Cassette Club, a Columbia House Music Club. And their hook was you get 8 CDs for 1 penny. And then, every month they'd send you the CD of the month, right? I signed up for that, under MJ Towler and then which is my nickname, it's based on my initials. And then I would use my first name and then I'd use my middle name, and then I'd just make up things and get them sent to my girlfriend's house and her nephew's name. So I got all these CDs, right? I had at one point 400 CD collection and it was very eclectic. So how does the music, how's that come out to play? So my wife bought me a record player, 2014, 2015 for Christmas. And I had lost most of my CDs between various moves back from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so it just set off this thing where I just started collecting vinyl. I wanted to recreate what I had on compact disc on vinyl. So I just
old school. Nice. I like it.
Yeah. And so, like I said, geek out, you get obsessive. So next thing I knew, I had 600 or 700 records.
And your wife left you because you were taking up her whole house.
No. You should see her shoe collection.
Oh, okay. Touche. That's fair dues then.
And so when I launched the Black Wine Guy Instagram, which was kind of a goof on influencers, to be honest with you. Because I have a friend who owns a restaurant, and I, at that point, my day job, I was working with teens, high school kids, helping them get into college, et cetera, and so on. So I was doing like my own personal Instagram was just like motivational quotes and stuff, and me saying you could do it and stuff like that. And my friend, and of course I knew this because I've done so many things. I had a social media marketing company, but I wasn't thinking about tribes and niches. So he's like, oh my God, you see this wine community that's on Instagram. So I go on and I see people with incredibly, just creative names for what they were as a Somm, and this Somm and that Somm, or this enophile and that enophile, or, wino with an EAUX. And so I was like, what? I'm a wine guy. I'm black wine guy. Like that, it was literally like a spoof. It was a spoof on some of the crazy names for well, I did it for 9 months. I never showed. All it was bottle shots. And that was what was so funny. I was like, it's just pictures of people standing with bottles, right? And I was like, and those aren't even like great bottles. Some of them were like supermarket wine bottles. You know what I mean? Like, and I would see all the likes. So it was just kind of being funny, right? At first, I shut it down for like 6 or 7 months because I wasn't doing that. I was like, what am I doing, man? I'm wasting all this time on social media. But then when I came back, like I was visiting my relatives down in Florida. We were down there for Thanksgiving. They're like, what happened with Black Wine Guy? It was, So like that, I just put up a post and everybody's like, oh my God, where have you been? Thought you were dead. So I was like, oh, there's some interest here in this. So then what happened is I was like, okay, by sharing myself, right? So I grew up in Jersey, and Jersey is notorious for having attitude. Like we have an attitude in New Jersey. I was like, also from New Jersey is Gary Vaynerchuk, and guys like us. Like I grew up cursing, I wasn't supposed to, but like I didn't curse at home when I was little, but when I was at school, I was like, rap, 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 rap. I mean, I curse, right? So I was like, listen, and this is how I used to talk about wine. And so I started doing these reviews, and I would start with like lyrics from a song. The lyrics could be obscure. And so like someone asked me when I was interviewed a couple of years ago for a print article, like, how do you pick the word? And it could be one word on the label, right? Sometimes everything lines up. Like I'm like, they must have named this wine after a song. But sometimes I'll just look at something like I have a bottle in my hand right now and it says friendship is our foundation, right? So I might go just for that. I might be like, I'm going to use Friends by Houdini as the lyrics for describing this bottle. And then I go to my reviews where like I did one the other day, I'll say utterly fucking ridiculous amounts of juicy blue fruit, right? Because that's what I would say. If I'm drinking with friends, that's what I would say. I wouldn't, I wouldn't say.
You weren't filtering it.
When I did a few reviews, I was doing the whole wine speed thing, like copious amounts of unctuous.
We all know.
And I love those words. I love big words. But then I was just like, this wine, like a Syrah might be like, I'm like, it's like a tar-streaked blueberry Pop-Tart, right? Everybody's had a Pop-Tart. Well, not everybody, but,
Yes, but no, you get it. You get it. And it's much more accessible to say that than unctuous. And
yeah. Or like, instead of voluptuous, I'm like, ass so fat you can see it from the front, which is a Mos Def lyric, right?
Fantastic.
And so I think it was refreshing because I think people want to talk about wine. Like, listen, I tell people I'm not the biggest blind taster. One, people have been blind tasting forever, right? The Judgment of Paris was a blind tasting. So this phenomenon of blind tastings that was thrust on by like the Somm series, which did a lot for wine. But I think it makes people think that that's something new. And like my listen, there's nothing new under the sun. It just isn't.
Definitely.
So I one of my things is like, because of my age, I'm a Gen Xer. So I'm between the baby boomers and everyone else, is understanding, but also like what I try and do, I have a lot of respect because I think people don't realize like it's atrocious that Kevin Zraly, who is like the godfather of wine education in America, has like only 8,000 followers on social media. And then, an attractive young woman with her WSET1 has like 50,000 followers.
Yeah. It's disconcerting to say the least.
And I love marketing and I get it. I've had a social media marketing company and I get it. It's fun, it's exciting, but also the issue is it can get away people go down these rabbit holes, and a lot of stuff these people are saying, they're just stealing passages from books and stuff they said, and they're re-saying it, and they're not adding their own spin to it besides their cuteness.
Yeah, I love social media, but suddenly everybody's an expert on everything because there's no way of checking their credentials. So it's interesting. It's an interesting time.
It is. Like I said, everybody's an instant expert. And what drew me to wine was like I could never know it all.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing. No one can ever know it all because it changes every year. You never know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, that was Mary Ewing Mulligan, Master of Wine. I think first North American woman to get a Master of Wine, author of Wine for Dummies on the podcast. And she just said what you said. She said, I can't claim to know everything about wine because even if I know a certain wine, it's different the next vintage. So how can you know it all?
Exactly. And that's the fun. That's the geekiness. That's the total magic, seductive addiction of wine because it's always changing. It never gets boring. Well, so listen, I've heard rumors that you've got a really cool idea for a more inclusive rating system, kind of like not using, linear and unctuous to describe wines. You came up with a rating system that was fist bumps. I love this. Describe this to me. Tell me sort of the ethos behind this idea because I really hope you pull this off.
Basically, it goes back to the Wine and Music Connection, one of the most influential magazines in hip hop. Definitely was the Source magazine in the 90s.
Yep.
And early aughts. And interesting enough, I had friends who wrote for the Source. So the Source would rate albums with a mic system. So like 5 mics would be like, it was like 5 mics, go buy this dope shit today, right? Like it was like 5 mics.
I remember that. You're right. I'd forgotten all about that. You're completely right.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, the fist bump, which has been around forever, but was brought mainstream by President Barack Obama and him and Michelle doing it. So everybody knows the fist bump. And I was like, well, what if I did like 5 fist bumps? A fist bump system, like 1 fist bump, So that's really, it was an homage to the music. It was like, oh, okay. So you can relate to the Source, it relates to the Source magazine and it's very simple. Now, I will say this, though. There are people who denigrate like Parker and the point system. But here in the United States, we grew up taking tests and we understand points. So I understand why they did that. You know what I mean?
People like medals and stickers on their wine labels. If you're in a grocery store confronted by 3,000 bottles of wine and you don't know anything, you're going to look for the one that has a gold medal sticker on it.
Right. That's the thing. Like people I'm like, okay. They won gold at the Central California Valley Wine Festival. And that's what I tell people. Like, even if people follow me, like my recommendations, like I find it interesting. I'm like, I tell people all the time, you don't have to like what I like, and I'm just sharing these wines because I felt moved. I really like right now, I only write reviews when I feel moved because I don't get paid for it. And even when I wrote them before, I was like, I felt moved. Like I felt moved by the wine, right? That being said, you don't have to like what I like. You shouldn't, because this is the best thing I heard recently. I had another master of wine on my podcast. She's like, I can't be in your mouth. Like your body chemistry is different. Your saliva is different in your mouth. This is different. I don't know what you ate that day. Like it's all different, right? So it's so subjective.
And it's really personal. Tasting something is very personal. I work with, I teach. I'm a professor of wine and culture, and I teach students who are in their early 20s. And it's such a personal thing, especially if you haven't got an experienced palate and you can't talk about, white truffles and stuff like that. It's very interesting to talk about what something tastes and, why you should like it or why you shouldn't. Either you do or you don't. It's personal.
That's it exactly.
Well, I'm going to be watching your Instagram and your podcast, and I want to see fist bumps after you're talking about wine because I think that makes it so much more accessible to such a wider audience. It's so non-threatening. Everybody knows what a fist bump is, as you said. Thanks, President Obama. But I want to see that happen. I think you could make this a thing. You're onto something. I like the fist bump rate. You could even get stickers to go on the wine bottle.
Oh, no, man, listen, this is why I love talking with people because ideas come, and it's
Exactly. Well, look, before I let you get away, I have to ask you my very famous final question because we're on the Italian Wine Podcast. What's your favorite Italian wine? And I have to know what music you'd pair it with.
Man, so
after your comments on tar, I have a guess.
Here's what I can tell you. I will tell you that is, I don't know. I don't drink enough Italian wine. So matter of fact, I'm in the midst of doing an Italian wine study with some friends of mine who are really knowledgeable in Italian wines. They own several restaurants here at the Jersey Shore. A lot of wines from Italy. they're the only place in America that gets them. They go over and they have great relationships. So we're doing this thing called Italian Wine 101 because I want to learn more. What I'll tell you, I will share 3 bottles I had recently and last year that I thought were incredible. I had a 2019 Bartolo Mascarello Dolcetto d'Alba. Oh my God. And
Dolcetto, very underrated. I'm glad you like it.
Exactly. I mean, now this is like a $40 to $45 bottle retail Dolcetto.
That's very sad. I'm not telling you what it costs here.
No, I know what it costs there, but but I will tell you, I was like, I love Dolcetto. It's so underrated. It's easy drinking, but this had some sophistication and was just delicious. It was brought by a guest on the podcast who loves Italian wines, imports a lot of Italian wines, and that was his thing. He's like, Dolcetto gets no love, and I was like, bro, you're right, it doesn't. And then this is where social media does work. Sometime someone had posted this. A bottle of Barbera, and it was in my wheelhouse because I like Rhone wine, so I'm not afraid of 15% alcohol. So this was like a 15.5% alcohol Barbera. So it was a 2012 Filippo Galino Barbera d'Alba Superiore. Oh my God. It was silky, smooth, black. It was just made my top 30 wines of the year last year. So I love Barbera and Dolcetto. They're great everyday wines. You could pick them up in the States for like $20 or less.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, Barbera is one of my favorites, and Alba's great.
Yeah, well, those could be a little too tar. That's the problem. Like they're like tar, rose petals and tar.
Well, if you are a tar guy, we've got to move you on to Barolo and to Gattinara and to Valtellina Superiore. Those are my 3 recommendations for you if you're a tar guy.
Okay, and then this one, and then I'll try and think of a music pairing for this one, but this was just outstanding. I was over a friend's house, and we were drinking wine. We've had a shit ton of good wine, and his wife was like, "We need one more bottle," which we really didn't. But that last bottle was a 2010 Tignello, and that was Theodrate. It was 2021. Yeah, that was 11 years in. It was in his pocket. It was amazing, and it was beautiful.
Oh wow, iconic wine, Tignanello, iconic.
Yeah, I mean it's iconic. And what would I have paired that with? I would pair that with. I'll tell you what I'd pair. And pairings have to do with it's the totality of things. Who I was drinking it with, and because my friend who shared this bottle with me and my wife. He's a musician, kind of like has a ska band, in addition to owning a retail shop. What's the commonality of us where we intersect with that Tignello? I would say Ma and Pa by Fishbone. Hey, Ma and Pa, what the hell is going on? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Oh, well, I got to tell you, one of my songs, same sort of thing, back in high school in the early 80s, when I was a real jazz head in Cleveland, was Wine Light by Grover Washington. And I have been looking, I didn't drink wine then, nobody drank wine in Ohio. I got into wine when I was 20, but I have been looking for the wine to pair with that for my whole adult life. And when I find it, I will let you know.
Well, you're so funny. I want to hear that. I want to hear that pairing. And when you said you're from Ohio, I'm like, okay, so when we drink wine, it's getting paired with Back to Ohio by the Pretenders. Like, that's where my mind works. It just goes random.
Oh, yes. Awesome. That is awesome. Okay. Well, we can't top that. We're going to have to stop here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciated talking with you.
Cynthia, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And when I'm headed over to Italy, I will let you know so we can get together.
You are more than welcome.
Thank you for listening, and remember to tune in next Wednesday when I'll be chatting with another fascinating guest. Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world and the only one with a daily show. Tune in every day and discover all our different shows. You can find us at ItalianWinePodcast.com, SoundCloud, Spotify, Himalaya, or wherever you get your pods.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.